talk,
identity,
and access
management.
Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff. How's it going?
I'm good. And yourself?
Good. I thought I could this week kind of open with just sit here and complain about the fact that I'm moving this weekend, and everybody knows that moving is one of the least enjoyable moments of life. But I decided to look at it as an opportunity because today I scheduled my landscaping for the new house, and I decided not to schedule it for Thursday afternoons when we record the podcast.
That's a bonus, I guess, right?
I think it's going to save me a lot of stress.
I think that's probably a good thing. It's like always the worst thing that comes up whenever you're trying to do something around like a podcast or whatever is, the audio quality. And I'm a little bit of a stickler when it comes to that kind of thing, but I'm always afraid that, there's going to be some kind of noise. It's going to be the landscapers, whether it's for my place or the area that we live in, or, my wonderful dog, Duncan, or Layla might be shouting at something, some leaf in the front yard or whatever it may be. But
the one that you didn't mention, which was the time you said, Jim, what's that noise? That's my ankle popping, Jeff. Thanks for pointing that out. I am getting old, and yes, my ankle makes noise.
Yeah, well, my ankles make noise too, but geez, Jim, keep it to a dull roar over there. All right, well, I think that's enough of the witty banter section of the Identity at the Center podcast. What do you say we get into our topic and introduce our guests?
And wait.
So we've got today Julie Smith. She's the Executive Director and Chief Cat Herder at the Identity Defined Security Alliance. You can find them on the web at www.idsalliance.org. Welcome to the show, Julie.
Hey, thanks, guys. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. And, given that the name of the podcast is Identity at the Center, it was really just a matter of time.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct, right? I mean, it's kind of important, right? Identity to security and the way things are working around the world today.
No doubt. Yeah.
So before we get into the IDSA, one of my traditional first questions is talking about or asking our guests, how did they get into the IAM space and whether it chose you or you chose it. So maybe we can start there.
That's a great question. So yeah, my background is technology, and so I've been in the work world for way longer than I'm willing to admit to, and I've done everything from tax software development to telecom to storage networking. And about 10 years ago, 12 years ago now, I kind of started to see what was going on in my local community, which was Denver, because my goal was always to work in a headquartered company where I live, and then also saw this interest in security. And as more and more people carried around smartphones and computers and cloud applications were just getting started in terms of the SaaS industry about 12 years ago, and saw that there was this interesting space in security and an interesting company locally called Ping Identity. So I've been in the identity and access management space for about 12 years. Started with Ping as in product management, and my focus was helping to put together a roadmap that we could go out and communicate with customers about and get an understanding of what were their challenges and what types of things were they trying to solve, and how did that inform where we were headed in the future. So that was about 6 years of my career. Moved into marketing after product management. So then I got an opportunity to not just learn the story from a product management perspective, but then tell the story from a product marketing perspective. And great place to be. It's interesting to me that now 12 years later, in some cases, we're still talking about the same things we were talking about 12 years ago. I decided it was time to take a break in my career. So I took some time off, took some great trips, had a chance to think, and decided I wanted to go explore the non-vendor world, so the services side of things, and expand my horizons into that solution provider space. I ended up with a small consulting company based out of Colorado Springs, that is now part of Proof ID. Did some business development there. It got a different perspective, so more around identity and security as opposed to just traditional identity and access management. And then moved on to a little bit bigger fish in that space, Optiv. And my role there was to support the identity and access management solutions business. So not just the product side, but also the services side. And how did we collectively go to market? And I'd say that's kind of where I got much more interested in this connection between identity and security. You know, when I was back at Ping, I worked a lot with Patrick Harding, a luminary and character in the identity and access management space for a very long time. And he and I would banter about this need to make that connection, that identity was so much operational and it really needed to be a key focus for CISOs and the security teams. And when I got to Optiv, that was something that I had carried with me. And I engaged with the group at Optiv that was advising CISOs, and these guys were former CISOs, and started talking to them about, you know, hey, what's your view on identity, and why have you not really cared about it in the past? And it's like, that stuff's too hard. And, you know, I'm more focused on reporting up to the board around what's our security strategy, and, you know, identity is that operational thing. It's not really considered a part of security. So, that's kind of a long-winded story about how I've evolved my career and why I've become so passionate about this identity and security connection, which sort of led me to where I am today.
Yeah, I was going to say, Jeff, so does that get a check mark in the Julie chose security or security chose Julie?
I don't know. That's a good question. What do you? Oh, let's leave it to Julie. So let's answer the question. Did IAM pick you, or did you pick IAM?
That's a great question. I think I picked an interesting company in my community that I then found out was a really interesting and fun and exciting place that had a lot of long-term growth. How about that?
That's a very diplomatic answer.
I know, I'm good at that. I actually have to be diplomatic in my role. So yeah. You'll find that I may be very diplomatic throughout our entire conversation.
That's fine. I mean, this is just a conversation about identity and access management between a bunch of old friends. So that's all good.
Exactly.
So Julie, now you've run the IDSA. Talk to us about why that organization exists. Maybe give us a little bit of history on the organization.
Yeah, so I mentioned two companies in my history, Ping Identity and Optiv, and the Ping Identities has been around, or excuse me, Identity Defined Security Alliance has been around for a couple of years. It started out as a technology integration program. So, you know, pulling together a group of vendors with identity being the primary focus of that, with a couple of other, what I would consider more traditional security companies. And then Optiv got involved, and that was where I got involved with the organization. And at the time, there were other identity and access management companies out there, and privilege access management. So CyberArk and SailPoint were advocating for a very similar concept through their technology integration programs. And so I worked with another character in the identity and access management space, Robert Block, who was at Optiv at the time, and we would have discussions around, you know, this thing is interesting as a program within a company, but it's much more interesting and could be much bigger if we actually took it to a place where it was vendor neutral and we elevated above the concept of integrating technologies together, but got into a bigger space and a bigger conversation around identity and security and the connections there, and why that's so important for security folks to understand identity, and, you know, what kinds of things could we do for the community that could help them be successful. And so, long story short, in 2019, I spun it out as a nonprofit standalone entity, and we've been around for about a year and a half now. We've got 24 members. It's a combination of identity and security players. Some are, you know, longtime identity players. Some are new to the identity space. We've got solution providers involved as well. So those folks that are kind of sitting above the vendors and consulting with companies and recommending solutions for them and helping customers solve challenging problems. And then we've also got a customer advisory board that is made up of a number of security leaders, some cases CISOs that represent the practitioner community for us, and help guide our mission and help make sure that we're heading in the right place and having an impact on the community, and then they can go advocate to their peers as well.
So it's a relatively young organization, only, like I think you said, a year and a half, and you've got a pretty good, who's who in the IAM space from a membership perspective. Companies like CyberArk, Okta, SailPoint, Savient, Omada, Optiv, Centrify, BeyondTrust, et cetera, Ping, right? Are there, I guess, what is the audience that you're looking for when it comes to the IDSA? Are you focused more on the technology vendors themselves? Are you looking for, membership outside of that, maybe, practitioners, those sorts of things, or something else?
Yeah, so our target audience, and obviously these are conversations that we have. I have a group of very talented senior executives and about 6 companies that sit on the board. So fun to be a part of that group and have them advising me. And we have this conversation. So who is it that we're really trying to help? And for a while, I would say that we were focused on the identity community. And then, if you take a step back from that and you say, well, if you're talking to the identity community and you're telling them about how important identity is to security, you're kind of preaching to the choir to a certain extent. And so, we kind of pivoted a little bit, I would say, as a sort of a small little scrappy startup has a tendency to do, and said, where we really want to play and where we believe we can really help is if we target that security community. And it's not just the CISO level, but it's all the way down to the architect and maybe in some cases the implementer with some of the things and the resources that we make available. But let's talk about and educate why identity is so important. We've done some research on our own that if you think back to, at the end of it was probably in 2013 or 14, the Verizon Data Breach Report had started reporting that identity was the key attack vector. It was the cause of the majority of the breaches that were occurring out there. And so despite that number being put out there, for whatever reason, identity, probably because I think people perceived that it was still pretty hard to do. Projects were long and difficult, but the security team really hadn't embraced it. So we said, let's go and let's really try and create resources and education and enlist a group of people who are part of our mission and believe that identity needs to be core to security, and let's go and educate the community. So our target audience is educating those security practitioners that are trying to address these challenges. They're trying to make their organizations more secure and teach them about how they can achieve those things, how they can become more secure through identity using those existing investments that they've already made, right? I think that's probably another key part of it, is that people think about a new security strategy, they may start to get a little scared about, well, now I'm gonna have to go make a huge investment and a whole bunch of new tools. But in reality, it's really just about sharing the identity context across all these different technologies and bringing together the smarts and making smart access and authorization decisions that then can protect your data and your assets that are so important. So we're definitely targeting the security community and the end practitioner. We also are looking to bring in more of the security vendors. We've had conversations on occasion about, is our name a little too intense, putting identity at the center of your security strategy, identity defined security alliance, does that then put off some of those security vendors? It's interesting to me when when you're out at conferences, when we used to be able to do that, or even searching the web, that you see these security vendors are talking about identity now. So it's really just about bringing those two communities together, not just from a practitioner perspective, but also from the vendor community perspective as well.
It's obvious that Jeff and I buy into the identity at the center kind of strategy. I mean, it's something that we talk about a lot, and Jeff and I work together in doing advisory services and essentially helping companies define their strategy. And we fully buy into the identity concept. And I think when you look at different frameworks that are getting a ton of popularity, like Zero Trust, I mean, it really depends on knowing who it is who's accessing your systems and having good controls about that. You mentioned your research. We did an episode back in May, I think. It was episode 44 about identity, a work in progress. Really great research, and it led me and Jeff to kind of scour your website. There's just a ton of content out there. So what I would recommend for our listeners, the IAM practitioner, if you will, or why ever you decided to listen to this podcast, go out and check out the website, the idsalliance.org website, for a ton of the content. But Julie, I guess the question in all this is, kind of beyond the research, what is it that you do? What are you making available to the public? I mean, I just see a ton of stuff out there, but maybe you could just take a moment and describe what is out there.
Yeah, sure. And I really do appreciate you guys. I was unaware that you were going to do that. And so I was super excited to see your podcast where you talked about that research. So yeah, and that was actually our second research study. We had done one last fall. The first one kind of focused on more organizational and motivations and alignment, and tried to better understand how identity and security were being managed in the organizations. And so that's also available out on our website. So we've got two different research papers that both in their own way highlight this importance of identity and security together, and not just the technology side of it, but also making sure that you're addressing the ownership side of it, and there's things that you can do from an ownership side of things, and better align motivations and priorities and incentives and strategies and all those things. So I encourage people to take a look at that, as well as the research report you guys talked about as well. So in addition to research, we've got a pretty rich blog. I would say that when we first started out, again, back to this kind of scrappy startup idea, kind of trying to find our way and where do we really provide value back to the community. And we had this lofty goal of creating a community, and if we create this online community, people will come and it'll be great, and they'll interact with each other virtually, etc. Not so fast, my friend. That's a lot more challenging than it may seem. And so we pivoted to content and said, gosh, we've got 24 companies. There are super smart people in these companies, and I'll be the first to stand up and say, I am by no means an expert in this space. And the value I bring, I think, is pulling that group of people together and kind of mining. I call myself almost like a museum curator sometimes, but mining the smart people and the content and the intelligence that we have in this great membership, and turning it into blogs and articles, byline articles. So you'll see we're starting to get published more and more. We're doing a lot of speaking engagements, and in most cases, it's our customer advisory board that are talking about identity security from their perspective. So what have they done in their organizations, and how do they see success based on what they've done? And I think that's the best way for practitioners to learn about this topic, is hear from their peers. And in that vein, we've also published a number of customer, I should say a number, we've got not as many as I would like to have, but customer stories. So we've got two poster children companies, if you will, who have implemented Zero Trust using technologies that they already have today, and have helped provide sort of implementation stories and guidance and lessons learned from what they've done in the last year or two. So that's just kind of, content that's available from an educational perspective. I would say the big thing that we've been working on, and it's, again, kind of shifted and morphed a little bit, and I think we're now where we really want to be, and we look forward to expanding it, but is around our identity-defined security framework. And the framework is made up of best practices, and in most cases, at this point, these are around just identity and access management foundational best practices. So what are the things that organizations really ought to put in place? We're not necessarily saying that is has to be there before you start thinking about an advanced concept like identity-centric security, but these are things, best practices. You should be doing these things, and it's certainly going to make your identity-centered security strategy better and more effective. And then, what we launched in May, which I'm super excited about, are a library of security outcomes and implementation approaches. And these are 16 today, but we will be expanding security outcomes. And so this is where I think the rubber meets the road. It's, what are the outcomes that organizations are hoping to achieve when you're bringing identity and security technologies, or even just thinking about an identity-centered approach to security? And then what are the implementation approaches to get there? And we certainly recommend best practices in implementation and, security outcomes. But there are implementation approaches, and in most cases, there's multiples for each of those security outcomes. And that's because there are different ways to, dare I say, skin a cat. I hope my cat doesn't get mad at me saying that out loud, but there's different ways to approach these and achieve these outcomes. And so we're here to give you alternatives, and then you can work with your vendors, your solution providers if you have one. But tap into these resources on, if I'm looking to put MFA in front of all of my privileged accounts, or today we talked about, on a webcast that I just published today, we talked about continuously discovering access rights, not just user access rights, but privilege access rights. What are the technologies you need to do that? And how do you put those things together? And what are the different approaches to help you achieve that particular outcome, and why? Why would you even want to do it? So I think the framework really is sort of the main body of work, if you will, that we've been working on. And I'm super excited about that content as it exists today, and I'm really looking forward to where it's going to go, because this is definitely a problem that people are trying to solve: become more secure, reduce the number of identity-related breaches, and I think we've got a really good start at helping customers do just that.
I'm really impressed with the information that's on the website, because I look at articles, obviously quite a bit as part of what we all do, right? As far as, our jobs and our roles and careers, et cetera. And I actually found your best practices framework via just a native Google search. So kudos to the SEO on that article. But what I thought was really good about it was that it's something that I can point to and say, look, if you don't know anything about identity and access management, right, or you know very little, let's say, and you want to get kind of up to speed quickly, I think it's an excellent article, and we'll have a link to this in our show notes as well for the people who are listening and want to check it out. But it really does a good job of kind of breaking it down at a very high level. I don't think it's too technical. I think it's very digestible. So I really like that best practices article that's out there. And then I also really like what you're talking about, the security outcomes, because there's a lot of times where, people might mention, wanting to achieve a certain task and they're not quite sure where to start with it. I think you put one out in May around like continuously discovering accesses or entitlements or something on those lines. And the way that it was formatted, you really kind of described what you're going to need, from a software or a service perspective. What is it that you're trying to do, and more importantly, what are the prerequisites to be successful with that? So, my hat's off to, I think you've done a really great job with the content itself, and whoever's writing it, yourself and others, I tip my cap to them, and it's something that I definitely would, link out to folks that are looking for, more information to, as Jim likes to say, sharpen the saw, so to speak, when it comes to identity and access management. So I'm really happy to see and hear that kind of content is going to continue to kind of flow, because I think people do learn specifics. They learn specifically when they can point to examples, right? Here's how Adobe did it, or Logarithm did it, which I think are some of the customer sources you've got on the website. But more importantly as well, what doesn't work, right? Sometimes you might be trying to do something that another organization tried to do, and they encountered issues that you maybe not have thought of. So I think that's just as important, is to, how to do it as opposed to not how to do it, so to speak.
Yeah, thanks. And just a couple of follow-on thoughts, actually, as you're saying that. So, the best practices, I don't believe that our mission is to go and educate people about the nuts and bolts of identity and access management, right? So I think organizations like ID Pro, who are trying to create more identity and access management professionals, we partner with them to provide them content and, try and create awareness amongst their group. So our best practices are, are intended to be a little bit above that and then kind of set the stage for where you're going next. So we're very much about, partnering with other like-minded organizations in this space for sure. And then, I think the interesting thing you touched on about Adobe and Logarithm and our customer advisory board and some of the webcasts that we've done where we've done panel discussions with this group of people that are, super smart and are in these security leadership roles. And it's just interesting to hear them talk to each other. And the last one we did, we had a moderator, and this was actually under the Identiverse umbrella, but we had a moderator moderating questions, but then the participants started asking each other questions. And it was just really fun and interesting to hear these folks, talk about what they're doing and share best practices. And, Eric Anderson from Adobe said to the CISO of Robert Half, Clint Maples, hey, let's talk offline because I can help you implement a zero trust initiative. And it's really not that expensive and it's really not that hard. Actually, I think he did it, Adobe did it with the technologies they already had in play. And so it's just, that's the kind of thing when we have those conversations, either in a panel or at a session at RSA, those are the kind of things we'd love to figure out how to take online. And then really the entire practitioner world could get access to that information. So, I think that's the fun part of this is when we do get those people just having fireside chats, even though, 100 or 200 people are listening and sharing best practices. So it's super cool. It's a lot of fun, as you can tell.
So, no, I think this is the community piece that you've been talking about. And, we may envision the community being some kind of message board in the beginning, but I think what the community really is about networking and practitioners helping one another. And, I think that's all of our roles is to help I think that's one of the coolest things about security is that even competitors can work together when it comes to security and best practices, because these aren't things that provide kind of a competitive advantage, right? We're not, we're the more secure bank or the more secure retailer. I think it's in all of our benefit to make the internet more secure and to make our organizations more secure. I would think that all of our practitioners take no joy in seeing another data breach that's occurred, right? It's like that makes me feel a little queasy every time I see it, because I don't think that makes, gives any advantage to company A that their competitor had a data breach. I think that just brings us all down. And so I think by having that community, just furthers the industry, furthers our field to make things better. Julie, I think you gave us a really good coverage in terms of what the IDSA is doing now to kind of further the mission. I'm wondering what's next. Where are you guys taking this going forward?
Yeah. So on your point about, and then I'll talk about where we're going next, but on your point about coming together and let's, I hate to use, war language, but let's battle, right? These folks that are trying to get access to our identities. I think that is an interesting part of our discussions, right? So how can we leave the vendor hats at the door and let's come together and talk about how we can help everyone become more secure. And one of the ways you do that is you put yourself in the shoes of the cyber criminal. And so we do have a webinar. I'm just going to put in a shameless plug here coming up. And there's actually a blog that I published this week too around hacking identity. And so we've got a gentleman named Jared Brennan coming on, and he's a former pen tester. He's going to talk about, what are the attack vectors that cyber criminals are after as it relates to identity, and then tie those back to the outcomes. So that's kind of an interesting topic, and it's September 3rd, but it'll be out on demand as well for those who listen to this later. But yeah, I'm just as excited as I am about everything we've done so far. I'm even that much more excited about the new technical working groups that we've just kicked off last month, actually. And so we reached out to our technical working group, and that is, members of all of our companies, and in some cases multiple members. And these guys are product product management people and strategy people and technologists and folks that are dealing directly with customers, and just smart people that are have been in the identity and security space for a long time. And we polled them and said, what is it that you're hearing from your customers? Where should we go next? So, zero trust has been a hot topic for quite some time, and now remote working, securing your remote workforce is a hot topic. And so we've kind of been working on those two things. But, what are the interesting things that you guys want to explore that will then help, help communities or help our community as they start to tackle these problems? And so we kicked off 6. And actually there was one already in process, but we had 6 new technical working groups in July. Beyond best practices is the first one, and that's really intended to, take that body of work we've done already and expand on it. So where else can we go in terms of helping organizations with just foundational best practices that they should be implementing in their organizations? DevSecOps, right? So the emergence of DevOps and now the security aspect of DevSecOps and what's happening in that space today, and is identity playing an important enough role in DevSecOps? You think about access and authentication. I mean, that stuff should be baked into those applications as they're getting spun out of these fast development organizations and fast development cycles, and making sure that security is baked in as they get deployed. So that's an important one, I believe. Artificial intelligence and machine learning and identity. So what's the role that those two new technologies play as it relates to identity, and where is that going? And we've already seen some of that stuff emerging through risk-based authentication and using user behavior analytics to inform access decisions, so that maybe you let people in if their behavior deviates or doesn't deviate, and then block them out if they do. So, advancing that AI and machine learning as it relates to identity is the third technical working group. Customer identity and access management. I'll tell you that up until this point, just given the nature, I think, of where we grew up, we focused primarily on employee identities or, workforce-related identities. So those identities that are more known to you, for example, and now we're expanding out beyond employee identities and starting to look at the security aspect of customer identity and access management. There's a whole space there around branding, but and user experience and the marketing driven elements of customer identity and access management. But you need to start thinking about privacy and consent and the security of those customer identities. So we've got a working group focused on that. We'll continue our zero trust efforts and continue to expand the body of work there. NIST comparison, there's a number of NIST security frameworks, and we found in our research that about half of the companies that we surveyed are using some sort of security framework already. And so but yet they don't always highlight identity to the way we as a community believe they should. And so that group is really about mapping our security outcomes to the NIST frameworks. And that may be the cybersecurity framework. It may be the new zero trust framework that was just released yesterday, the day before, I think. And then the last one is really, what are the things that organizations can do to prepare for identity-centric security? So are there organizational things that they can put in place? Are there technologies that they may be missing? There may be gaps in their technology stack that can help with an identity-centric security strategy. Just what are those things that that'll help you prepare for getting to that place, and what are the questions you need to ask, and who are the stakeholders that need to be involved, and those kind of things. So those are the new working groups. That is certainly a place where we would love to get the voice of the practitioner community to come in, and we're primarily vendors. We've got some customers through the customer advisory board. We are relaying what we hear from our customers into those conversations, but there's nothing better to inform what we do and make sure that we are really solving the problems that people are solving today. We need those people that are in the trenches and doing it. So if any of your listeners are interested in any of these topics and excited about what we're doing and want to help become a part of the community, please go out to our website and reach out. And we would love to get your voices heard in the work that we're doing in the next round of content and additions to our framework and topics that we'll be covering.
Well, I know I'm excited. Just that list that you went over, and one that, I mean, it was like the hit list of everything that's cool and hot in IAM right now. But one that jumped out at me is customer IAM. I mean, we've seen a shift of our consulting services that Jeff and I do, taking a bigger and bigger percent focused on the customer IAM space. And actually, that's my background. So my first IAM project was implementing a portal, taking multiple websites and doing IAM, but it was external customer facing. And just thinking about how broad that space is. And, I think it's a harder problem to solve, especially coming from the standpoint of defining best practices and things like that. I mean, but we face those questions all the time. What are the best practices for this workflow or things like that? Doing passwordless authentication, et cetera, et cetera. Mainly, I think what people are asking when they ask for best practices are, what are our competitors doing? What are other companies doing? And I think having a forum or having a working group focused on that would be excellent. I'm kind of wondering, from your perspective, what do you foresee kind of the outcomes of these working groups? Is it going to be the blog articles, the customer stories, the webinars? Is it kind of the same structure of content, or is there something different?
Yeah, that's a great question. And Asad Ali, I'll give props to Asad. He is the head of the technical working group. He's a senior technologist with Talus. And has been really fantastic in being the cat herder as it relates to the technical working groups and getting these things going. So huge props to him for all he's done around the organization. When we started talking with these leaders, and we reached out to specific folks and said, hey, you're interested in this topic. Would you take this on and lead this technical working group? And almost across the board, everybody said absolutely. So I love that kind of energy, and so that obviously translates to people being very excited about it. And with that, we've said we do have some things that we'd like you to continue to contribute to with the lens of your technical working group. So whether it's the best practices or the framework, the security outcomes specifically, those are the things that we would love for you to create outputs that feed into those things that we've already established. But beyond that, it's up to you. I mean, we do have a blog. So if you guys want to do a blog series, fantastic. If you want to hold a webinar to educate, if you want a white paper, we sort of said, run with it. And the IDSA and me and Assad will do what we can to support you. So we sort of gave them a bit of free reign. And there's at least one group that's doing some really interesting stuff that I'm not going to spoil the surprise, but I think could be really cool that will come out later this year. So it's all of those things really. And I also said to them, in their roles, they are closest to the customer these days. I get a chance to talk to customers, but they really are on a day-to-day basis talking to customers. And so what is it that they believe is going to be most useful to help the people that they engage with on a daily basis to succeed? So kind of gave them a bit of free reign. So I'm super excited to see what comes back.
It'll be interesting to follow up on that and see where things head. But I think it's always smart to know what it is that you are asking for and whether that's going to be appropriate or not, or even people interested in it. So it's good to hear that some of these organizations are contributing back to the IAM community and security at large, right, by kind of raising the tide for all boats, so to speak, and making it easier to help protect identity at the end of the day, which is what we're all trying to do. And there shouldn't be too much consternation around that, let's just say. Jim had mentioned earlier that when another company gets breached, no one else wants to see that. And I certainly wouldn't want to, because typically what happens is a competitor gets breached, and then there's like are we next? Are we prepared for that? What have we done? And that typically leads to a more focus on the IAM part of the organization, or security, information security in general. When you have something happen to a competitor specifically. So it tends to shine lights on things that maybe haven't had a light shown on them in a while, which can be good or bad, depending on, where you're sitting and where you're at. So I think it's good stuff all around.
I was just going to say that, in the report that you guys spoke about on a recent podcast, 79% of companies said that they had suffered an identity-related breach in the last 2 years. So the likelihood that your competitor or your peer has experienced that is pretty darn high. And we also, ask questions around what their security culture is like. So, and this is, self-described question, but, do you think about identity along with your security strategy, whether it's at the center or, you've made that connection, and are you forward thinking as it relates to implementing identity security outcomes, or are you proactive and reactive? And what we found is that the companies that self-describe themselves as forward thinking, only 34% of them had an identity related breach in that 2-year time frame. So, there's definitely success in having that focus on an identity-centric approach to security.
Yeah, I agree with that. Hence the name of the show. So
exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So you've been more than generous with your time, and I appreciate that. And before we start to wrap up things here, are there any other words of wisdom or things that you'd like to get out there to make people more aware of the Identity Defined Security Alliance?
Yeah, that's a great question. You mentioned earlier that we have a website full of resources, and I would encourage people to go and spend some time on it. We've done some research that I think is super interesting and sets the stage for why identity is a critical component of everyone's security strategy, or certainly should be. We've got resources out there to help you achieve identity-centric security. We've got, customer stories of people who have gone before you. And I would encourage people to, take some time and check out our website. And I would also encourage you, if you have a passion in this space, to get involved. You can sign up in our online community. If you hit community on our website, go out, sign up, and get involved. And I just want to thank you guys. This has been a lot of fun, and I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks, Joey. Well, it was great having you on the show. Jim, is there anything that you want to close out with?
Well, I just wanted to say, if I was thinking, I'd like to just recognize or thank all the companies who are making the investment in terms of their dollars to support this organization and to have their people participate in the organization and provide the content in a free way, because I do think it's like a treasure trove of content out there that's just available for practitioners to further their education and their expertise in this field. And I know, having a day job, I know that a lot of this work is probably happening in the evenings and on the weekends, and people out there like myself appreciate that.
Hear, hear. So we're going to have a whole bunch of links in this episode. So we'll have a link to the idsalliance.org website. I'll put links also to the best practices and zero trust articles that we kind of talked about here. I have already registered for that webinar that you guys have coming up on hacking identity. So I'll put a link to that as well for folks that want to check that out. And if you want to connect with Jim and I, we're on LinkedIn. You can also visit us at identitythecenter.com. We're at IDAC Podcasts. For Twitter on the IDS Alliance, they're at IDS Alliance, which is another good one to follow. And then I think with that, we're going to go ahead and close it up for this week. Appreciate you joining us today, Julie, and thank everyone for listening, and we'll talk to everyone in the next one. You've been listening to the Identity at the Center podcast. For more episodes, visit identityatthecenter.com.